The table was already set when I arrived. A long white cloth stretched across it like a stage curtain. Crystal glasses sparkled under the lights, and every piece of silver cutlery shone so bright it looked like it had never been touched before. My parents loved this sort of thing. They called it family night, but deep down, I knew it was never about family. It was about showing off. Relatives we barely spoke to all year had flown in for this dinner. Some came out of duty, others for the free food and drinks, but my father? Oh, he lived for these nights. This was his stage. His chance to perform. His chance to pretend he was the man everyone thought he was. I kept my head low as I helped my mom bring out the platters. Roast beef, garlic potatoes, bowls of salad that nobody was really going to touch, it was all part of the show. I set down the bread rolls, and that's when my mother leaned in close. Her whisper was sharp, like a knife hidden behind her smile. Smile. Don't embarrass us. Her lips stretched wide, all teeth, no warmth. It wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel safe. It was the kind you put on for neighbors so they think your life is perfect, even when it isn't. Dinner began the same way it always did, with my dad holding court. He picked up his wine glass like it was a microphone and launched into one of his endless stories where he was always the hero. He paused at all the right moments, waiting for laughs. He waved his arms dramatically like some kind of actor. Cameras clicked. Relatives snapped photos, pretending to capture the memory but really capturing him. My aunt even started recording a video, eager to catch him in his element. Every time I opened my mouth to answer a simple question, my dad cut me off. Halfway through the meal, my uncle looked at me and said, "Why are you so quiet?" That was my dad's cue. His grin wasn't friendly, it was sharp. "She's always been better seen than heard," he said. A few chuckles rolled across the table. But he wasn't finished. He never was. "Tell you what. Let's make her useful." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My dad leaned in, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Come on. You're not contributing to the conversation. At least contribute to the decor." Before I could even react, his hand pressed against the back of my head. One hard shove. My face slammed straight into my plate. Mashed potatoes. Gravy. The sting of something hot splattering against my skin. Gasps. Laughter. Both at once. I lifted my head slowly. Bits of food clung to my hair and cheek. My dad leaned back in his chair, beaming like he'd just delivered the punchline of the night. "There," he said, pointing at me. "Now she matches the table." The room broke into laughter. Some laughed awkwardly. Some laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all year. But not one person told him to stop. Not one person defended me. My mom sipped her wine, pretending nothing had happened. Some cousins had their phones out. They were recording. Taking pictures. Capturing my humiliation like it was entertainment. I stayed frozen. I didn't cry. Crying would have made his night even better. I just sat there, my face burning, my hands trembling as I wiped myself with a napkin. Dad leaned toward my uncle and said, "She's sensitive. Can't take a joke." My uncle laughed. I stayed silent. Every bite I forced down after that tasted like shame. Inside, though, my mind wasn't quiet. My thoughts were already racing. When the meal ended, my dad moved on to his favorite activity, posing for photos with my sister, Madison. She was his golden child. His shining star. The one he bragged about to anyone who would listen. And of course, she smirked at me. Like she'd just been handed a gift she could use against me for months. The room was loud with conversation and clinking glasses. I excused myself quietly and locked myself in the bathroom. I leaned over the sink. My reflection looked back at me, streaks of gravy still in my hair, makeup smudged, eyes glassy. but dry. I didn't want to cry. I wanted something else. Something sharper. Something that would wipe that smug expression off my father's face forever. And then it hit me. Every single one of those relatives had a phone. Every single one. And they had been recording. The very same cameras my father adored, the ones that made him feel important, were the same cameras that had just captured his cruelty in perfect detail. And if that footage ever came out? His perfect image would shatter. When I walked back out of that bathroom, I smiled for the first time that night. It wasn't the smile my mom demanded earlier. It wasn't fake. It was quiet, controlled, and sharp. Not because I felt okay, but because I suddenly knew the cameras my father loved so much were going to be the very thing that destroyed him. The rest of the evening, I became invisible on purpose. Nobody notices the quiet one in the corner, especially when the spotlight is glued to my dad and Madison. They were busy giving speeches about family values and how we always stick together. Every time those words left their mouths, I wanted to laugh out loud. Stick together? Values? Those words were cheap decorations, just like the polished cutlery. I sat back and watched. I watched hands holding phones. Some were still recording, others scrolling through photos from earlier. It wasn't hard to guess which moments they'd captured. Every now and then, a cousin would glance at me, snicker, then tilt their phone away when they noticed me looking. Good. That meant the footage existed. All I had to do was get it. When dessert came out, I slid into a casual conversation with my younger cousin Dylan. 14 years old. Addicted to his phone. Eager to be treated like an adult. Hey, I said casually. Can you send me a copy of that video from earlier? You know, for memories. He grinned instantly. You mean the mashed potato thing? That was hilarious. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice light. Yeah. That one. Send it to me before you forget. By the time the cake was being cut, the clip was already sitting in my messages. Over the next 2 days, I gathered more. Aunt Sherry sent me a shaky vertical shot where you could hear the gasps ripple around the table. My cousin Ashley had the clearest one, a full view of my dad's smug smirk, my mom sipping her wine, and the exact moment my head hit the plate. And Dylan's? His was gold. Close enough to catch every word, make yourself useful as decoration, followed by that awful wave of laughter. 3 angles. 3 perfect nails for the coffin. But I knew footage alone wouldn't be enough. My dad was a master manipulator. He twisted everything into a joke, into something harmless. He could smile, shrug, and people would believe him. No, this time, I had to set the scene so no one could laugh it off. So, I started editing. I didn't cut anything out. I didn't need to. Instead, I wove the truth around it. Clips of him bragging about our tight-knit family. Clips of him talking about respect. Smiling holiday photos. Polished social media posts. And then, slowly, leading up to that one moment at the dinner table. I slowed down the shove. I let the sound of laughter ring out a little longer. I froze the frame of my face coming up from the plate, food clinging to my cheek, my eyes empty. And then, in bold white letters, I added. A father's joke. A family's laughter. A daughter's humiliation. I didn't post it online. That wasn't the revenge I wanted. I didn't want strangers laughing or pitying me. I wanted something deeper. I wanted him to feel the ground vanish beneath his feet in front of the very people whose respect he craved the most. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, my parents announced they were hosting a slideshow montage for the extended family and close friends. A recap of the dinner. A night to remember, they called it. They rented the same banquet hall. They ordered fancy catering. They wanted everyone to remember the joy we shared. It was perfect. They planned to use the big projector at the front of the hall. And I already knew where the USB port was. For the next few days, I played my role carefully. I smiled. I even helped Madison pick her outfits for the event. I nodded along while my mom went on and on about the catering and decorations. Meanwhile, the real slideshow, my slideshow, sat quietly on a drive in my bag. The night of the event arrived. The hall buzzed with chatter, the smell of expensive appetizers filling the air. My dad worked the room like a politician, clapping backs, shaking hands, laughing too loud. Madison snapped selfies with anyone who would pose with her. I stayed in the background, patient. And then, when nobody was watching, I walked calmly to the projector table. 10 seconds. That's all it took. My drive was in. My file was queued. Their slideshow was gone, replaced by mine. As I walked away, my pulse hammered in my ears. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was something deeper. For once, I wasn't powerless. For once, I wasn't the quiet one in the corner. I was the one holding the strings. The lights dimmed. The chatter softened into silence. The projector screen lit up with the opening title slide, A Night to Remember. My dad took his seat front and center, his face glowing with pride. My mom leaned close to him. Madison leaned in, perfectly angled for the photos she thought were about to happen. This was their moment. At least, they thought it was. The slideshow began. It looked normal at first. A few stock photos of champagne glasses clinking. Some staged family shots. Smiles. Laughter. My mom whispered something to my dad, and he chuckled softly. But then, my first clip rolled. It opened with my dad giving one of his grand speeches about respect and family. His voice boomed through the speakers, crystal clear. You could even see people nodding in the footage, pretending to agree. And then the screen shifted. His words kept playing in the background, but the video faded into slow motion. His hand shoving the back of my head into my plate. Gasps filled the room. A collective intake of breath. The sound of shock spreading like a wave. The audio switched back to live sound. His voice. Make yourself useful as decoration. Followed by that chorus of laughter. On screen, my face lifted from the plate, food dripping down my cheek. Freeze frame. Silence. Then the next angle appeared. My uncle's phone, showing my mom sipping wine, smirking, while I wiped myself. Then Dylan's angle. My dad's smug grin in perfect focus. And between each clip, the bold white text appeared. A father's joke. A family's laughter. A daughter's humiliation. The room was no longer laughing. The room went quiet after that. My parents froze, and for the first time in my life, they looked small. Not powerful. Not mocking. Just small. My mother's hands trembled against the chair. My father's eyes darted to the floor like a child caught in a lie. My sister's smirk had vanished, her mouth hanging open in shock. I had taken back the power they had stolen from me for years. I stood there, breathing slowly, my heart pounding but steady. And I realized something: revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about showing myself that I was no longer the broken little girl they laughed at. I wasn't their toy. I wasn't their punching bag. I was free. I looked at each of them one more time, and I spoke. My voice was calm, but sharp like a blade. You don't own me anymore. You don't get to laugh at me. You don't get to control me. I don't need your approval. I don't need your love if it comes poisoned. I came here to show you that I am alive, strong, and untouchable. And now, I'm leaving. This is the last time I'll ever stand in this house. They didn't answer. They couldn't. The silence said everything. I turned and walked out. Each step felt like shedding a heavy chain. With every breath I took outside that house, I felt lighter, like the air itself was finally clean. But here's the truth, revenge alone doesn't heal the wounds. It gives a spark, a fire, a release, but healing takes time. It takes rebuilding. It takes choosing a new story for yourself. So I started building. I poured my pain into work. Every night I studied harder, pushed myself further. I didn't study to prove anything to them anymore, I studied to prove something to me. That I was capable. That I could rise from ashes. That the girl who once slept on the floor, laughed at by her own family, could carve out a future so bright it would blind their memory. I worked 2 jobs, saved money, and pushed through exhaustion. And every time I felt like quitting, I remembered those nights on the floor. I remembered the laughter. I remembered how it felt to be less than human in their eyes. And instead of breaking me, it fueled me. Revenge gave me fire. Healing gave me direction. Together, they gave me freedom. The days after that confrontation were strangely quiet. For years, my head had been filled with their voices, the mocking, the laughter, the cruel whispers at night when I lay on the floor. But now, there was silence. And at first, the silence felt strange. Empty. But slowly, I began to realize silence was peace. Silence was freedom. Silence was the sound of healing. I stopped waiting for their calls. I stopped wishing for their approval. And for the first time, I started living for me. I went back to my tiny apartment that night, and I sat on the bed. I looked around at the chipped paint, the old furniture, the small space. To anyone else, it would have looked poor, almost broken down. But to me? It was mine. It was safe. It was a place where no one laughed at me, no one threw me to the floor, no one treated me like I was nothing. I whispered to myself, this is where I begin again. Healing was not quick. It was not clean. Some nights, I still woke up hearing my sister's laughter echo in my head. Some mornings, I still felt that sting in my chest, that question, why didn't they love me? Why wasn't I enough? But each time that pain rose, I had a choice, let it drown me, or let it remind me. I chose to let it remind me. It reminded me to work harder. It reminded me to keep moving. It reminded me that I had survived what tried to break me. And slowly, piece by piece, I built myself. I found better work. I took night classes, pushing through exhaustion until my body ached. But this time, the ache was different. It wasn't the ache of humiliation. It was the ache of progress. I saved every dollar. I cut away every toxic tie. And I began surrounding myself with people who lifted me instead of tearing me down. Years passed. And then one day, I received a letter. It was from my parents. The words were shaky, almost desperate. They wanted to reconnect. They wanted to see me again. A part of me almost laughed. The same people who once laughed at me now wrote to me with trembling words. Life has a way of turning the wheel, doesn't it? But I wasn't the same girl anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't crave their love. And I certainly didn't owe them my forgiveness. So I wrote back only one sentence. I wish you peace, but I have built my own life without you. I sealed the letter and walked away. And here's the truth I want you to hear. Revenge feels sweet for a moment, but healing lasts a lifetime. I didn't just destroy the power they had over me that night, I built a new story where they no longer existed in my shadow. I became my own person, my own family, my own protector. The girl who once slept on the floor beside a dog, became a woman who rose higher than they ever imagined. And that, right there, is the greatest revenge of all. Healing didn't come in one big moment. It came in small steps, tiny choices I made every single day. I remember waking up one morning, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel that knot in my chest. I made myself a simple breakfast, eggs and bread, and I sat by the window. The sunlight touched my face, and I just breathed. It was such a small thing. But to me, it was everything. It was proof that I could feel peace again. I started to write down my feelings in a notebook. At first, it was messy. Angry words, tears smudging the ink, pages full of why me, and why didn't they love me? But over time, those words changed. Slowly, my notebook filled with dreams, goals, and little victories. One page said, I got a promotion at work today. Another said, I laughed so hard with a friend, and it felt real. Another, I finally slept through the night without nightmares. Bit by bit, my life was stitching itself back together. There were hard days too. Days when memories would creep back in, when I could still hear the sound of their laughter. Days when I asked myself if revenge had really been worth it. But every time, I reminded myself, I didn't just take revenge. I took back my life. And that was bigger than anything they could ever take from me. One of the most powerful things I learned in that time was the meaning of choice. I couldn't choose the family I was born into. I couldn't choose how they treated me as a child. But I could choose how I responded as an adult. I could choose to keep living in the past, or I could choose to step forward. And every day, I chose forward. I remember the day I signed the lease for my new apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was brighter, bigger, and full of possibility. I walked into the empty living room, set my bag down on the floor, and just stood there in silence. Tears ran down my face, not from sadness, but from pride. Because I had done this. Me, the one they called worthless. Me, the one they laughed at. Me, the one who once slept beside a dog while they gave my sister a bed. Now, I had a space of my own. And no one could take that from me. Over time, healing also meant learning forgiveness. Not for them, no, I didn't owe them that. But for myself. I had to forgive myself for the years I stayed silent. I had to forgive myself for the nights I cried, wishing I was someone else. I had to forgive myself for believing their lies. Because here's the truth. You can't fully heal until you stop blaming yourself for what others did to you. That's when the real freedom begins. The years rolled by, and I kept growing. I worked harder, built a career, saved money, and created a life so stable, so strong, that no storm could shake it. And something surprising happened along the way. I stopped thinking about them. The memories became faint, like an old scar. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. That's when I realized, true revenge is not about hurting them back. True revenge is living so well that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. But life, as it always does, had one more twist waiting. One day, out of the blue, my sister reached out to me. She sent me a message. Her words were shaky, almost timid. She said she wanted to talk. She said she regretted things. And for a moment, all the old emotions rushed back. The anger. The pain. The betrayal. But then, I took a deep breath. And I realized something powerful. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her regret. I had already healed without it. So I met her, not for her sake, but for mine. When I saw her, she looked different. Older. Tired. Like life had not been as kind to her as she expected. She looked at me with eyes full of guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. And you know what I did? I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw her words back in her face. I just looked at her, calm and strong, and said, I already forgave myself. I don't need your apology to be free. And with that, I walked away. That was the moment I knew I had truly won. Because revenge had given me justice. But healing had given me peace. And peace is the one thing they could never touch. Please like and subscribe for more videos. Also comment where you're watching from.